And I'm like talking with people who are in the group, and it took them, a year and a half, or they've been in the program for 2 years and they haven't gotten their first deal. And I'm sitting there going, oh, these guys are slackers. Like, they're not really committed. And I'm doing this full time, and I'm totally committed, and I'm going to just, really be successful in this. It took me 2 years to get my first deal.
All right. On the show today, we have Matt Picheny.
No,
I think I said it right there.
Did I do it wrong?
Picheny.
Picheny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Picheny.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we literally talked about it before.
Yeah.
Picheny. So I apologize for that. I even practiced and still messed it up. But Matt Picheny, thanks for coming on the show, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me here, Mike. And Dan, I appreciate being a guest here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to dive into your backstory and kind of all the stuff that I guess you've been working on. You have, I would say, a pretty dang fascinating, I don't want to say like rags to riches, because you were doing stuff. You weren't like homeless, but the financial turnaround and the lifestyle turnaround that you've had through real estate is one that's really, really impressive, really to be admired. So I'd love to sort of hear about your background, where you came from, and everything that you're working on now.
I was like technically homeless, but like, I mean, seriously, there was a time there where I was couch surfing at friends' houses, but that's because I used to be an actor. So that's really, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, moved to New York City to become an actor, and I used to go off on tours, and so I didn't make a lot of money back then, and it didn't make sense for me to have an apartment in New York City and pay rent if I could just have no place to. So then when I would come back, I would have to couch surf for a few weeks or months until I found a new living situation. So yes, technically, but not really, not like living out on the streets, which is a real serious thing. I had done that and started doing some computer work on the side as a hobby, and had an opportunity to really start my own company doing website development and digital marketing. This is back in the 90s, right? So we're talking about like the mid to late 90s. The dot-com, bubble was there, right? And everyone was doing digital marketing and building, because nobody had websites. Everyone was building their first websites. And that's what I did. I did a lot of that kind of work. And I ended up starting my own boutique agency. So instead of waiting tables at the Hard Rock Cafe in between acting gigs, as I had been doing, I started doing some digital marketing work, and then so much work was coming in. I started my own agency, and that things were going great until around 2001, when the dot-com bubble burst, and all of my clients were going out of business, and my business just completely imploded. I was just in really bad shape. My clients either went out of business or just weren't spending money on digital marketing. And at that time, I got a call from my landlord, and he told me that I had 90 days to get out of the apartment that I was living in. So,
well, I mean, 90 days, at least he gave you that. To give you like 2 weeks.
But, I in New York City with no real job or income, like, how do I find a new place to live? And it seemed like a really, really daunting task, while, the whole digital marketing world is falling apart to figure out what am I going to do next. I ended up getting a job working for one of my clients, Showtime, the cable television channel, Showtime. So went there, and instead of renting an apartment, which is what I had initially looked to do, I actually found an apartment that I could buy, and it was all the way upper west side of Manhattan, in an area called Washington Heights. So not really my desired place to live, like much further away, but it was affordable. And a little over 2 years later, I ended up selling that apartment and seeing my down payment, my initial investment in this property, more than quadruple in value. And so that was a big, it was a big light bulb moment for me. I was making a good salary at this point, but in that one transaction, I made more money than I made in a whole year's worth of salary.
Right.
So I was like, whoa, how can I make that happen again? And that's when I started to get involved in real estate. A couple years later, I bought my first investment property, which was actually a piece of raw land that I then built a house on. It was vacation rental
Interesting.
home, and then I got involved in some single families, and I did some fix and flips, and then ultimately ended up doing what I do now, which is getting involved in multifamily, and I do multifamily syndications.
Mm.
So, I did real estate as a hobby for 10 years and then turned that into a full-time job about 7 years ago. So I've been doing the real estate stuff full-time for 7 years as an investor. I've got a large portfolio, over 10,000 units that I have ownership in. Partial ownership, I don't own all of those outright.
Okay.
And 2/3 of that
Mhm.
portfolio are deals that I am a passive investor in. So limited partner, just investing in it. I'm not really involved in the day to day, but I do have 1/3 of that portfolio, almost 4,000 units now, that I am active. I'm a general partner on. I sponsor those deals, and I am involved in those on a daily basis. So that's kind of
Yeah.
the nutshell story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. There's a lot of good stuff to unpack there. And one thing that I think is really interesting. So the background that you started with doing the web development, I have I feel like the fact that you're able to be somewhat successful with that probably directly contributes to how you were able to scale into this multifamily stuff, because you had those entrepreneurial roots, it sounds like, kind of from the get-go. If you were running this web development business, and you were also doing it in a time where that was hard to do in like the 90s. It wasn't like you were going and making like a WordPress
Oh
website. You
no.
were actually having to
Oh yeah.
code and do stuff custom and manage the servers and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. So I'm sure that you developed a lot of problem solving, sort of skill sets and ways to, learn to get into complex problems and sales and all that sort of stuff. Was that something that kind of came naturally to you? Or was that all just like you saw an opportunity and you learned how to
I
learn
think
that?
I think a little combination of both. I mean, my real first career was in the theater as an actor for 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of sales that's involved in that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of
Yeah.
facing rejection and just keep it going and going and going and going, and being able to sort of be adaptive, and also in between acting gigs figuring out how are you going to make ends meet, and what kind of jobs can you do, and can you be nimble, and can you be scrappy, right? So I had to do that. And then, yeah, I mean, I think you're right when it comes to the digital marketing stuff as well. And it was I was coding HTML by hand and JavaScript, and figuring out how to
Yeah.
integrate Cold Fusion and Flash. I mean, those technologies don't even exist anymore. I mean, I don't think Cold Fusion is around
Yeah.
at all. Flash obviously went away a long,
Yeah.
long time ago. But back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, that was all the rage, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it was a steep learning curve.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's awesome. There's three different occupations that we see regularly lead to people getting into investing, or like people that are successful investors. They come from these different backgrounds, and one of them is sales. Obviously, people know how to sell, people know how to get rejected, those sort of things. That's a big one. The other two, which are sort of less intuitive, a lot of people in the medical field we see come over. And one theory with that is that they make good money, but I also think it's because they are used to just putting up with outrageous situations. Like you have especially if they work in like ER or trauma or things like that. And you're at a point where I cannot believe that I am, removing something from a human's body yet again. Right. So you're more accustomed to the stuff that comes with real estate. But the other one is engineering.
Yes.
And, people that are very systematized and learn how to learn processes, and like the technical nature of engineering and development really translates well to real estate. So, that's, I guess you're sort of helping support my hypothesis that if someone potentially wants to get
Mike
into real
loves
estate,
a good hypothesis
science and engineering
supporter
would probably be a
too.
place to start.
In my experience, speaking with other people who are real estate investors, I see engineers as number one.
Yeah, tons of them. I think it's just because it's like
All the
people
time.
love spreadsheets, and real estate seems to always start in spreadsheets, and we're all like, "Oh yeah, look at this," and these numbers work.
I never considered myself an engineer, although I did do some programming. But as I advanced in that career and got involved in the digital marketing world, starting with my time at Showtime, when I was at Showtime, I sort of transitioned more from programming to project management. and I love spreadsheets. And so I'm like, now I'm a PMI certified project management professional. I mean, that's what I did, manage people, budgets, and timelines. And so when I transitioned over to doing real estate full time, it was really taking those same skill sets and all those same processes and just moving them over to real estate instead of marketing, you know. It's the same kind of thing as what you're saying, you know, just really loving spreadsheets, being process oriented. I think it lends very well to managing any business, but definitely real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because like Mike and I, we are both engineers, but also you learn in our business, like what other skills you need to have. Like being able to run numbers is amazing, but then you also have to figure out how to find deals. You know, that's a different problem to solve. And then you have to acquire those deals. You have to sell people. There's all these other skills, but if you have one really good one, you can get quite far with it. But if you want to like keep to grow success to where you have 10,000 units under management, you have to layer on a few other skills.
Yeah, you have to layer on skills, number one, but number two, you could also bring people in as partners who maybe complement you really well.
I love that.
You know, that's something that I've been able to do that's been very helpful in terms of like the acquisition. I mean, some of the deals that I have are through relationships I've developed with property managers and with brokers. But I have partners that I've worked with that I've brought in on some deals that I've found, and they've brought me in on some deals that they've found. And so it's been a nice sort of symbiotic relationship. And honestly, like acquisition, I'm very good at underwriting, but going and meeting with all the brokers and, you know, shaking hands and coffees and schmoozing, all that kind of stuff is not, I mean, I'm fine at it. I can do it, but I don't know that I love spending my time doing that. So nice to have other people maybe focus more on that, and I can focus on other things.
Absolutely. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a perfect segue back into the real estate stuff where, you know, you mentioned that you kind of got the bug from selling your first apartment that you had, which I feel like is how most people kind of get their introduction to real estate. You know, you buy your starter home, you know, live in it for 5 or 6 years, you sell it, and you're like, wow, I just made my salary or more, you know, off that asset that we purchased. But going from there, you did the land development with a short-term rental, which sounds like you just dabbled in that a little bit. But the transition into apartments, that can seem like a pretty big leap. And obviously going from, I have sold my primary residence, I've done an apartment rental, to now I own 10,000 multifamily units. That is there's a lot that happened in between there. Right.
Yeah,
so and that's not something you're going to do alone.
You know what I mean? I mean, there's a lot of steps that happened along the way. It wasn't like an overnight thing.
Yeah. So I guess, how did that start? Like, how did you first sort of start getting into multifamily and like other people that were looking to do the same? Because I feel like residential investors, especially, it always feels like a hurdle. And you go and you talk to most people and they're like, oh, just like network and, you know, talk to brokers and do all these sort of things. And sure, that can be part of it, but that's also what everybody else is doing. So like, what is the way that someone that really wants to seriously get into multifamily investing, that, you know, I guess, what would you tell them to do? And like, what do you think was helpful for you when you first started that journey?
The thing that was really helpful for me is, well, let me back up a second and let you know that like, I didn't know how I was going to build a real estate business. I knew that I wanted to do that. I knew I wanted to grow it and scale it. But I had a problem. And the problem was I didn't have a ton of capital. You know, at the point that I was going ahead to do this full time, I owned a townhome in Brooklyn. It was not an inexpensive purchase. So I had a lot of money, you know, that I had put into there for a down payment, and, you know, equity in there. And I also had a vacation home that I rented out, and that was in Connecticut. So I didn't have a ton of capital to deploy. And I had bought the place in Brooklyn about a year and a half, roughly a year and a half prior to this. I knew that the deal in Brooklyn would cash flow, and it did. We ended up moving to Miami and we rented it out, and it was cash flowing. But even before that, my plan was, hey, can I do another one of these deals in Brooklyn? Because I knew at that point, like, that I could rent. I didn't know it was called cash flow, but I knew I could rent it out for more than I had paid for it when I had the 2 units. It was a 2-unit property. And but the thing was I didn't have a down payment. So my plan at that time was, okay, I'm going to continue working in the advertising world for the next like 5 or 6 years, gather up enough money to have a down payment for another one of these and do another one of these things. Or I'd have to have some like rich uncle that I didn't know about die and leave me millions of dollars. Like Brewster's Millions. You ever see that old Richard Pryor movie? But like how am I gonna get all this money to do this? And when we ended up moving to Florida, my wife got this cool job opportunity, so we moved down to Florida, and that's when I decided to do real estate full time. And I was actually gonna do fix and flips. I was gonna flip properties, use that money to either keep some of the flips or buy other properties that were good buy and hold properties, wanting to develop, passive streams of income. Just tons of them, right? Massive amounts of little passive streams of income. And what happened was I started listening to podcasts, and this is many years ago when there was like literally no syndication multifamily podcasts out there. Now there's like a gazillion of them. Yeah. But back in 2015, there weren't any. And at least I never found them. And so I was looking to find out just about real estate. I was just learning about real estate, reading books, listening to podcasts, doing everything I could. And because I was doing it full time now, and I didn't really have a big portfolio, so I had a lot of time to spend on my education. And what I found on some podcasts, I heard someone talk about a thing called syndication, and I was like, wait, what's that? And it was somebody, the guest had their own podcast. So I was like, oh, let me go listen to their podcast. And then I heard them at some point talk about syndication again. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, what is this thing? And what it is where a bunch of investors can pool their money together and buy a property that they wouldn't be able to do and on their own. And I was like, whoa, bingo, like light bulb. This is amazing. Like, this is what I need because I don't have that rich uncle, and I don't, I'm not going to leave my wife and marry some rich old lady and hope she dies. So like, well, how do I get, how do I do this? And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I went to a seminar. It was like a weekend seminar. And so I was in Miami. I flew to Dallas, which is where this thing was, and got a hotel. And met all these people who were doing this, or, some of them were doing it. Some of them wanted to be doing it. And it was just an awesome community of people. And I was like, this is awesome. And some of the people that were in that group, because this was more like syndication at a high level, like you can use syndication for multifamily, you can use it for assisted living facilities, you can set up funds. Like there's many different things you could do. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but most Broadway musicals are actually done through syndications.
Fascinating.
And so funny enough, with my background in theater and my wife, that's what she does full time. She's on the business end of Broadway. We had invested in a few Broadway musicals, and they were syndications. I just didn't know they were called syndications.
That's fascinating.
There was all this syndication paperwork, subscription agreement, PPM, all that kind of stuff that you have in a syndication. I just didn't know that it was like a thing that was like called something.
Wow.
So anyway, it's very interesting. So some of the people who were in that were in like one of these mentorship groups. And so there are several mentorship groups out there that teach, there's ones that teach assisted living facilities. There's ones that teach multifamily. You have to be very careful. So if any of your listeners are like, oh, I'm going to join one, be very, very careful about what you do and what you join. They're very, very expensive. Some of them are scams. Okay?
Wow. Yeah.
Some of them are not scams. I know people, who've come up through the group that I went through and have been successful. I know a lot of people who went up through my group and are not successful. I know people who've done other groups and have been successful. So I think part of it is the group and part of it is you. For me, I was like, you know what? I'm really driven. I've been successful. I'm entrepreneurial. I'm going to join this group and I'm going to kill it. And I'm like talking with people who are in the group, and it took them, a year and a half, or they've been in the program for 2 years and they haven't gotten their first deal. And I'm sitting there going, oh, these guys are slackers. Like they're not really committed. And I'm doing this full time and I'm totally committed. And I'm going to just, really be successful in this. It took me 2 years to get my first deal.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's
it is
commitment to be grinding for that long.
And it's not an easy thing to do, but I went from a 2-family townhome in Brooklyn and then I invested passively in some deals during that 2-year period. But the first deal that I did as a sponsor that I brought out to a group was 132 units in Kansas, is a $10 million property. So like I made a jump from going from like a 2 unit to 132 units. And that is definitely doable and possible. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen without a good group, like support group behind you. I had a number of people, you know, I look a little younger than I am. I'm going to be 50 in March. So, you know, at this point I was already, I was in my 40s. So I had already had a career. And so I had, a number of colleagues, people that I had worked with, and also friends and family members who knew me, who knew I had been dabbling in real estate as a hobby for 10 years, who saw me doing this full time for 2 years as not sponsoring a deal, but investing in deals. I had over 1,000 units, I think. A little over 1,000 units when I sponsored my first deal. 1,000 units as an investor, as a limited partner, and I was very clear with everybody I'm an investor. I brought on a very experienced copilot with me, another sponsor. We both co-sponsored the deal together so that I could have someone who'd been down that road a few times. We had done 10 deals at the time that we did that first deal together. We've done a number of deals together since. And so that we were able to do it, but it's not like I went from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds.
Well, so what else did, so I got to say a question. So it took you 2 years to find that deal. And you said you were also passively investing as an LP in other syndications. Was there any other real estate activities you were doing in that 2-year period to like maybe build more capital? Were you flipping houses, or were you just strictly like, hey, I'm finding a deal?
So I had a nest egg that I had saved up from my career, and it wasn't large, but I had a tiny little bit of capital to work with. And also, I was making money off of the townhome that we had in Brooklyn. I was getting positive cash flow from that. The property in Connecticut was like breaking even, but we had also invested in a little musical you might have heard of called Hamilton. And
Nice.
so between the Hamilton and the property in Brooklyn and my wife having a full-time job, we were pretty good. I did flip a couple of properties also while all of this was going on, sort of more at the beginning part of it, like the first year of that. I flipped a couple of properties. I made some money. I lost some money. Overall, I was net positive, but I did lose money in the deal. But that wasn't so much to speak of. I also, at that time, as you know, had that digital marketing background. I did a little bit of digital marketing things for some people in Miami that I met. I would do like I can do some Facebook ads for you, or so I did a little bit of stuff here and there. But once I got that first deal, I stopped.
You just focused on that.
But so I did moonlight a little bit here and there.
So then you're basically, it sounds like just super dedicated to that, just finding a deal. So what would you say in that category of like looking for your first deal? Like, where did you spend most of your time, and how did you eventually lock up that first deal and get that under contract?
So I first started looking for a deal in Akron, Ohio, in the Akron-Cleveland area, which is where I was flipping properties. I have relatives that live there. My cousin, who's like a really, really close friend of mine, lives there. And I was like, I knew the neighborhood. I liked his neighborhood. It was cute. And relatively, I mean, they've moved since, but they were like in what had been their starter home, so not like ridiculously expensive. I was living in Miami where like, this is just, prices are insane. Yeah. And so I was like, hey, this is a place where I feel comfortable getting involved in flipping properties because I can buy them at a relatively low price point and not like get too far out over my skis. So then I found out about syndication, but I was already there and had started making connections. So I was like, let me see if I can break into the multifamily space here. That didn't really prove very effective. I also was looking to do it closer to where I lived, which was in Miami. I grew up in Orlando. My parents live in Orlando. So I was searching in the Central Florida area. Couldn't find any deals there that made sense. Now hindsight, I should have bought all of those things.
Of course.
They all did great,
right.
but who knows? I was being conservative with my underwriting. I felt that it was too aggressive. I ended up then exploring Kansas City. So, I mean, I was already like a year into this before I started even looking in Kansas City, because I had spent a summer in Kansas City as an actor, and I actually liked it. I thought I was going to hate it. I thought I was going to be sitting around watching corn grow. And I found out, no, Kansas City really is like a really cool, very metropolitan city. Because I was stupid back then. I was in my early 20s. I didn't know anything. Kansas City's awesome. So ever since then, I was like, I always had a soft spot in my heart for Kansas City, the city that I like totally misjudged. So, and one of my best friends, my college roommate, moved to Kansas City. So I was like, all right, are you noticing pattern here?
Oh, yeah.
I chose markets where I kind of knew someone,
Yep.
like either my cousin or my parents, and I grew up there, or, Kansas City where I had a friend. And I started looking in Kansas City, and deals there were sort of penciling out on paper when I was just from far away, getting a couple of deals to just kind of look at. So then I said, you know what, this looks good. I'm going to start really targeting that market, and spent a lot of time in that market, meeting brokers and meeting with property managers. The reason why it took me so long, I mean, I guess you could say that first year was a little bit of maybe a wild goose chase in terms of like the markets weren't right. And also we had the birth of our second daughter. And also we moved from Miami to Boston at this point.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of other things going on in my life. Cause obviously like 3 months before the move and the baby's birth, because we moved very shortly after the baby was born, like obviously things sort of slowed down for us because of that. And then the move, and had to find a place for us to move to, whatever. And so Kansas City, though, I got to meet with property managers and brokers and establish relationships with them and build confidence. As real estate agents, they don't get paid until the deal closes. And so, I mean, I don't want to go into the whole ins and outs around it, but, just think about trying to build a relationship with a property owner, finally get them to list the property. You list the property, you go through the marketing, you get offers, you go through best and final, then a contract, and the contract is signed, and then there's due diligence, and finally you close. I mean, that whole process could be, that first part can be years of trying to build that relationship.
Right.
And once someone says, yes, let's go, I mean, you're looking at maybe 6 to 9 months from the very beginning to the closing. So these brokers are spending a lot of time, and they want to get paid, and they don't get paid until the closing date. And they also want to do right by their client, and they don't want to bring a offer to a client with someone who's not going to be able to close.
Totally.
It makes them look really bad in front of their client, like they don't know what they're doing, number one. But number two, they also don't get paid for for like a year's worth of work.
Right.
More.
Absolutely.
So you have to gain the trust. Like, how was I going to be able to talk to a broker that I just met and say, oh yeah, I can buy a $10 million deal, like 132 units, no problem. Like, they're not going to take me for face value on that, the first time I meet them, unless I have a very large amount of money in a bank account and can show them proof of funds or something, which I didn't have. I was syndicating these deals. Now, by getting to know these brokers, doing property tours, getting to know people over time, then they start to get comfortable with me. And then once I did my first deal in that market, then all of a sudden they were like, okay, he can really do it. He's done it now.
Yep. So is that when you, I guess, first started then doing this, you said you started talking to brokers, started talking to property managers. Basically, did you just start out like, hey, this property's listed, I want to talk to that broker? Is that like that? Is that how you started creating those relationships? And then maybe you're checking in with those brokers. There's like, you have like a follow-up system maybe you're using to stay top of mind, but also build that relationship with them. Because that's kind of what it sounds like you're saying is you had to build relationships with these key people, and then you had to build confidence with them that you could close.
Correct. I think that you hit the nail on the head, Dan. I didn't have like a system. What I did was I started going to Kansas City.
Okay.
and meeting with people face to face.
Gotcha.
How would I find them? I would look online.
Yeah.
And then once I got there and would meet someone might refer somebody, and it sort of organically, the circle kind of grew from there.
Right.
But yeah, I started off looking online for people, finding out who people were, you know, and meeting them. And then the next time I'm out there, try to meet them again. Hey, you want to go grab coffee? I'm going to be in town next week. I'm touring up, you know, I said to broker A, hey, you know, I'm coming into town next week. I'm going to go see such and such a property that broker B has listed. You know, we might make an offer on that one. We're doing a property tour, but since I'm in town, you want to grab a cup of coffee, right? Then broker A is like, oh, wow, Matt Picheny, he's like coming into town and doing property tours. Like he might be buying from broker B, who is my competition. Like maybe I should get to know this guy. Maybe he's legit. Right. And so in doing that and just getting to know them and not like, you know, being very honest and upfront about who I am, I never made any pretenses about anything, but I also was going into town to visit, to do a property tour, you know, I mean,
wait, so what you're telling me is there wasn't, you didn't have to hire a rocket scientist to find a deal. You just had to put in the effort, the legwork, meet people, network with people, go out of your way, flying there in this case to set up and having coffee and just putting it. You were putting the legwork for 2 years, and now you're 10,000 units later.
Yeah, so I would say now I'm like almost 4,000 units later because the other ones are LP.
Sure.
So that didn't have to do with the legwork, but
still a lot.
That had to do with like the mentorship group and all of that stuff.
Yep.
In the mentorship group, look, I learned how to underwrite these deals. It's not like, oh, I just went out and met people and then this deal fell out of the sky. Like there was a lot of deals that I looked at, a lot of deals. I counted the number. It's in my book. I can't remember. It's like 108 deal, 114 deals, something like that before I got my first deal. Cause I was getting really frustrated.
Yeah.
I was about like 6 months into looking at deals, but maybe somewhere between 4 to 6 months into looking for deals. And I could not find anything, right? Nothing was working out. And so I was like, I want to know how many deals I've looked at. And so I created a spreadsheet because I'm a spreadsheet nerd, right?
Yep.
So, and I went back and like forensically put in what I had done, what I had underwritten. So I probably missed a few here or there. And then I started tracking it. So I had like partial of 2016, all of 2017, and a partial of 2018. It was 2018 when I got my first deal. And so when I was writing the book, I like went back to that spreadsheet because after I got my first deal, I stopped. And I counted, and I think it was like 114.
Wow.
I don't remember. It's in the book, but I think it was like 114 units. That's not just deals that like came across my desk. That's deals that like I sat down and I underwrote.
Yeah.
So I've gotten very good at underwriting just because of repetition. You know, you ride a bike 100 times, you get good riding your bicycle.
Yep.
Same sort of thing.
Yep.
And through the mentorship group, I learned how to underwrite deals. And I also would read that in books. Also, when I moved to Boston, I took a whole course of studies there, actually 2 different courses of studies where I took lots of classes and I got certificates, one in real estate finance and one in commercial real estate, just to sort of fill in any gaps that I maybe didn't catch on all the podcast books and mentorship group things and video training and all of that stuff. And there were some gaps, not a lot. Most of the gaps were really like, all of my stuff had been focused on multifamily. And that's when I learned about like hotels and office and, you know, industrial and learned about all those other things, retail, through those classes. So, but like, again, none of it's rocket science. No. None of it is. The hardest thing to do is an IRR calculation, which you can do in Excel. There's a formula.
You're right. Yep.
Everything else is like addition, subtraction, you know, the basic algebra, like super basic.
You did. I wrote down. So I'm gonna repeat back what you just told us. So, which Mike and I love. You went and got mentorship. You paid to play. You went that, and that's one way to accelerate. I mean, without that, I'm sure you would argue it would have taken you another 2 years to even find a deal. So accelerating opportunity by getting good mentorship, by educating yourself through there. Then you basically practiced. You were underwriting deals. You were just doing it repetitively, not giving up. You went and got education. You further educated yourself. Like you said, you probably didn't have to have it, but you're sprinkling in. You're constantly adding to this bucket of knowledge you have. and then you were out there
And I'm still
networking.
doing that to this day, Dan. Like
Really?
I still look for opportunities to learn. I'm always trying to learn.
I love it. And you got to be, and you need to, because you have to adapt with the market. The market's ever changing, right? So you have to be able to adapt. And also, we've interviewed some folks in the past where they talk about sometimes your goals change. And so if your goals change, maybe you're like, hey, I loved apartment syndications, but now I really want to focus on strictly Broadway, and I want to just invest in Broadway syndications. You need to adapt and educate yourself, right? So I love that. It wasn't rocket science, like you said. You just put in the legwork. That was cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. And and then I think that's at the core of all real estate. It comes down to doing the things that are a bit boring for long enough.
Consistency.
And then stuff finally comes together, and just being consistent with it. It's the same with, what we do, which is wholesale real estate, right? Mostly residential. Going through and talking to all the leads that don't have anything to do with us is not very fun. Going through and, ordering the marketing and doing the data is not very fun, but it's where the money's
What's
made.
the fun part, Mike?
The fun part is getting to tell people about when we walk through, crack houses, or the insane stories that we have with some of our sellers that just make you instantly the most interesting person.
Yeah, and the checks that you get to cash every once in a while are fun. Those are fun too. But checks. The stories are why we do it.
That's true. Yeah.
Cool.
So awesome. Well, lots of good stuff there, Matt. And I love the way that it's like you're like the definition, I feel like, of keep it simple, stupid, right? Like, or keep it stupid, simple, or whatever it is. Where you're just you're doing the foundational stuff. And like I said, nothing's rocket science, and nothing is outrageous. And then to get to 4,000 units, you did do that relatively quickly. I'm guessing it's just more repetitions, more relationships, and just came together just over time.
Yeah.
Right? So awesome. I love it. So before we get into the show, just a quick tangent. I know you said you're an actor. I've been looking at your background. Is that a Tony Award that you have behind you?
There is. There's a
is that a real one?
There's two of them.
Wow.
There's one there and one there.
Oh.
Yeah. So my wife and I co-produced a couple of Broadway shows that won Tony Awards. So we get Tony Awards for that.
Wow.
Yeah. Moulin Rouge and David Byrne's American Utopia.
Really?
So that's cool. Yeah. So, I always wanted to win a Tony Award for like best actor. And unfortunately my acting career never got me there. But now, I had mentioned that we started investing in some Broadway shows, and we've actually co-produced some Broadway shows, and those two did really well.
So I know Moulin Rouge with Christina Aguilera, right? That was cool stuff.
So that was right.
That's
so
a movie.
No,
I know, but I was going to lead up to the question is like, so was there a connection to the Broadway where who, I don't know who played that character on the Broadway. I'm not a Broadway person, so I don't know.
Yeah. So, Moulin Rouge was a movie made by Baz Luhrmann.
Okay.
Right? And it starred Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like 20 some odd years ago.
Sure.
I think it was 17 years right before we opened the Broadway show, which was 4 years ago or so. We were able to work with Baz and get his, blessing and go ahead and take that and bring it to Broadway and bring it to the stage with like an amazing creative team and amazing cast. The show won 10 Tony Awards, including best musical, like best costumes, best set, best sound, best lighting, a bunch of the performers won best, best leading actor, best supporting actor, like all those different things. It was just a really phenomenally talented group that put this amazing show together, and it's still running on Broadway. So if you ever make it to New York, go check it out. It's really fun. And the cool thing that we did with the show was, if you remember the movie, it's like a mashup of like a whole bunch of famous songs. There's like an Elton John song in there. There's like a Nirvana song in there, right? And what we did, since it had been 17 years since it had been a movie and brought it to Broadway, we kept some of those classics in there. There's still a song by Elton John and Sting, and
cool.
A whole bunch of the classics. But we also brought in Katy Perry and Adele and Jay-Z and like a whole bunch of contemporary music as well, so that it really appeals to younger and older audiences alike. And it is just, it's a party. It is a really, really fun show. It's also off. It's out on tour now too, so it might be coming to the city where you live. But it's an awesome show. Really fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's
super
cool.
cool. Yeah, sorry for the tangent. I just saw the award back there, and I just wanted to bring recognition to it. That's super cool. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Very cool.
That is fun. I've been to a handful of Broadway shows.
I love arts in the theater. And so being able to still have a finger in that a little bit here and there is sort of like a hobby thing is really special that I get to do that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's what it's all about at its core. I mean, if you say you own 4,000 units, but you don't get to do any of your hobbies,
exactly. That's so true. I mean,
honestly,
what's the point?
So, but awesome. Well, good stuff, Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But all right, cool. So going into the end of the show here, we have our 3 end of show questions that we always ask everyone that comes on the show. So first one is going to be, what is your craziest real estate investing story? And this can be a big win. This can be like a crazy seller, crazy tenant, big loss, whatever
crazy
it is,
buyer.
your craziest story.
All right.
Crazy buyer recently just happened. And I mean, we just had all kinds of problems with this buyer, but the strangest thing that happened on it, and this was like, you have to understand that there had been delays and extensions, and this thing had just been going on and on and on and on and on. There were some extensions contemplated in the contract. We went beyond those extensions into more extensions. But we wanted to close the deal. We didn't want it. We could have taken the earnest money. There was over $1 million of non-refundable money at this point. We could have just taken it and walked away. But that's not who we're about. We just wanted to finish the deal and have them, buy the property. And so closing day, they're like $5 million short.
Oh boy.
So they're like telling our broker that they have the money and it's being wired that day. But one of the partners on their end is like back channel talking to one of my partners saying, we don't have all the money. Can you like give us a $4 million carryback and we'll pay you later. We'll pay
IOU, just a little IOU.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be more formal, but, and I'm telling this to the broker and the broker's like, no, so then the broker gets off the phone with me, calls the buyer, calls me back. He's like, no, the buyer says the money's been wired. It's in transit. And title's like, yeah, we're $5 million short. And I'm like, and they've been short this whole time. There's been all these delays, right? Finally at 4:30, they admit that they don't have the money. We're now told that they don't have the money, so that they're not going to be able to close on the deal, and that we need to give them the carryback. And I'm like, guys, you cannot wait until the day 4:30 on the day of closing. It's not like you just lost $5 million. You knew you didn't have this money. You've been dragging this on, and I am not going to give you a $4 million carryback. You have 2 options. You can extend for another 2 weeks and give us $200K. You're just going to give us $200K to pay for it. This is a $52 million deal. So this is because you're waiting until 4:30 and you need to feel a little bit of pain here, but also because they had mentioned this thing about that maybe they could get some hard money, and I felt like they were just trying to stall.
Right.
So I'm like, either that or you don't do the extension and we get your $1 million hard money and we all walk away from the table. But that's not what we want to do. We just want to close the deal. Miraculously, 10 minutes later, they get the $5 million.
Oh my gosh. 10 minutes later.
And it gets wired to, it's being wired.
Oh my goodness.
So it shows up, the title, it's not over. It shows up with the title company. The title company has $5 million, gets wired. So now they have all the money that they need to close the deal. Mm-hmm. So they send out an email and they're like, okay, everybody, buyer and seller have signed the closing statements, and per their instructions, we are now officially have closed on this deal. But being that it's 5:30 at night, we cannot wire the proceeds until, this was on a Friday, until Monday morning. So we will wire the proceeds on Monday morning. Okay. 6:30, I get a phone call from the title agent. Title agent's like, did you agree to give the buyer some of their money back? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, check your email. She's like, I just forwarded you an email. The buyer reached out to the title agent and said, hey, we need you to wire back $3 million. And like, here's the wiring instructions. Please go ahead and wire this money back.
That is crazy. Oh, wow.
So she was like, well, she writes back, like, has the buyer agreed to the seller agreed to this? And then the email back is not yet, was the response.
Not yet, but just send it. Just send it.
And then there was no more communication about the thing. Like, never heard about it again. I was sweating bullets until Monday when we actually got the funds actually appeared in our bank account. Because I was like, I don't know, is there some weird loophole where they can somehow
don't count your chickens till the eggs have hatched?
You know what I mean? Like, the money wasn't in the bank account yet. Once the money was in the bank account, I was like, all right, cool. But like, that is, I mean, the brokers are like, this is the weirdest thing that's ever happened. Titles, like, I've never seen it. Like, everyone I ever tell this story to, they're like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. So that's my strangest real estate story for you.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. So you never got any sort of justification for why they asked that?
They're just like, shoot your shot. Maybe I'll get $3 million back.
You have any sort of hypothesis on that? Like, I guess what I would assume is they probably got a transactional fund from somebody that was like going to be paid a lot over the weekend. And they were like, oh God, maybe we can just like give him that money back and then rewire it on Monday or something.
Oh, maybe the extra couple days of interest. Yeah. Man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at like 20 or 30% or whatever the daily interest was on.
That's nasty. Jeez. Like well, I'm glad you got your money and it closed, but yeah, that was probably a long weekend for you.
It was a very long weekend.
Man.
Yeah.
Wow.
So awesome. Yeah, that is a good one. That is like white collar crazy too. That's different than a lot of people that come on here and have like crazy contracts.
That's pretty cool.
Other crazy stories, like the unit that we walked into and there was like a monitor lizard and like an 8-foot boa constrictor and like all that. The guy had like 12 snakes in the unit.
That's par for the course for residential, man. We bought a house that literally had an entire room.
I forgot about that.
And they had like
they had more than that. They had more than that. The entire house smelled because they had so many birds in that room. It was gross. I bet you it was 75 to 100 birds.
Yeah, these like little like
everywhere.
Finches. They had everywhere. And you opened it and it was like
the floor was just poop, all poop. Yeah, it was terrible.
I like birds. That's
not that much.
Yeah. It was crazy. But all right, that's a good story. I like that one, man. That's probably one of the more entertaining ones we've had in a while. Cool. All right. So second question, what is the number one piece of advice you would give to, and this is the number one piece you give to either a brand new investor looking to get started or to a small time investor looking to get to the next level?
It's all about relationships. Mm-hmm. You know, in my book, I have these keystone concepts that I share with the reader, the things that I learned along my journey. There's 18 of them. And one of them says it's all about relationships, you know, and that's true in other businesses besides just real estate, but definitely in real estate, it's about those relationships that you make. Then that's how you can get to the next level of the game, or that's how you can get into the game. It's all been about relationships for me.
That's great advice.
Keeping it simple. Yeah. Real estate and life in general. If you have good relationships,
it makes it so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. Last question. Where can people find you, follow you, and reach out to you if you'd like to do so?
I would say go to my website, which is picheny.com. I'll spell that. It's PICHENY.com. And I don't know if you guys do show notes, but you'll probably put a link in the show notes for that. That's where I have, I have a newsletter that's got tons of free investment information. I send that out every month. I've got all these articles that I've written. There's tons of free education on there. You can find out about my book. You can download a free sample of my book. There's just tons of stuff on that website. So go to picheny.com and check it out.
Nice. Cool.
Perfect. Easy enough. Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Matt. I really, really appreciate your time. You had some really great information in here, and congratulations on your success too. It is pretty amazing what you've done over not a big period of time. You started doing that in 2015. I mean, 7 years, 10,000 units in. I know a lot of them are LPs, but that's still a very impressive portfolio. So good for you. And I appreciate you sharing the value with our audience. Well, guys, if you enjoyed this show, and if you didn't, I don't know what to tell you, you should please go and share this with anyone else who wants to start taking investing seriously and start buying properties and, growing wealth. Like, think about it. You could share this with somebody right now, and by 2030, which is about the same timeline Matt has had, they could also have 10,000 units. And that's not that far away. So go ahead and take action and share this with everybody. And if you want to start finding off-market deals, you can go to collectingkeyspodcast.com/free. And you can get our free off-market guide to start, our free 5-step guide to start collecting off-market leads, just like Dan and I do every single month. So you can start making some sweet money with off-market real estate as well. So thanks so much for listening, everybody. And we'll talk to you next week.